Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Cutting Through, where we present analysis of foreign policy and domestic politics that cuts through the noise of corporate and ideological driven media. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. You can find it there. Well, what is there to talk about today? It's obviously uh, necessary to discuss the decision by Joe Biden to finally step aside and let somebody who actually has a chance of beating Donald Trump take over the reins. It's obvious at this point that that will be Kamala Harris. There could conceivably be someone to challenge her, but that's really, that, and actually that would be a good thing. I think it would give a little bit more legitimacy to her candidacy, but there's no chance that anybody can beat her. Virtually the entire party from left to right wants her to be the nominee, and that's what's going to happen. So what does that mean going forward? There is a bunch of issues that we're all thinking about, and a bunch of things that are very, very important in this election, and nothing more important than defeating the Republicans and Donald Trump and making sure that they do not get to try to implement their Project 2025 and the authoritarian nature of the sort of government they wish to install. It is an absolutely imperative point. And as much as I and many, many others object to Joe Biden's policies in many regards, the real issue was that he couldn't beat Trump, because the fact is that no Democrat is really going to secure the nomination and bring truly progressive politics to bear. There really isn't anyone out there. The party itself is not in favor of such a nominee. We've seen that twice with Bernie Sanders. And this time around, there really isn't anyone standing for those kinds of policies. So that being said, one of the key issues that soured Joe Biden's campaign was Gaza, which is unusual in an American presidential election. Usually foreign policy is just not, even if it's a big story at the time, unless the United States is involved directly in a war, we rarely see that have this kind of impact on a presidential election, such that an incumbent nominee who basically had already won the nomination in terms of delegates steps aside. Now, obviously, Gaza was far from the only reason, and the one, of course, everybody's talking about, and understandably so, is Biden's cognitive decline, which was on display for all to see, and which made it clear, as I have been arguing for 2 years now, that Biden is not capable of campaigning, and so stands a very poor chance of defeating Donald Trump, who shouldn't be all that hard to defeat, considering that he is a twice impeached convicted felon who many people see as a clown. But let's face it, who many others see as virtually a messiah, and certainly as a cult leader who commands powerful loyalty from his base that no Democrat can match, nor should they. So, but that being said, Gaza was a significant factor. The Palestinian American activist Linda Sarsour, went to some lengths to describe how big a factor it was, and it was. We saw a sharp decline in Biden's standing, particularly in key swing states like Michigan, like Wisconsin, like Georgia, where we saw major movements to vote uncommitted that won many, many votes, and where there have been protests across the country that threaten relatively small communities of voters. Certainly Arab and Muslim Americans are not a huge part of our population in terms of numbers, but they are decisive in those swing states, and they are overwhelmingly historically voted Democrat in numbers between 60 and 70%, and they were down into the teens. That's a huge drop. And of course, we know that young voters who, in many ways, drive the turnout numbers. Uh, they have become reluctant to vote for Biden, feel like they have no choice, and it was very much looking like a lot of them were going to stay home. And that, again, when you have low turnout, Republicans win. It's just the fact of the politics that we deal with. And Gaza was driving a lot of that. So we need, this really was a major issue. It was not what one might think, a small thing. And there's a certain gratification in the sense that we are seeing so much indifference to the lives of Palestinians, so many people who implicitly are sending the message that Palestinian lives just don't matter. To see that there are significant segments, and not just Arab and Muslim Americans who obviously have a certain connection to the Palestinian cause for personal and cultural reasons, but also just young people, Jewish, Christian, white, Black, Latino, Asian, of uh, uh, all sectors of American society, who are saying genocide is not okay. And frankly, it maybe should be something that's expected, but it isn't. It isn't, and it is remarkable that so many young people are standing up and doing this when they're being faced with arrest, with being expelled from their universities, and all sorts of other potential penalties, and they have still gone out because this is genocide, and it is a big deal. And sadly, it's been a while since that's been a major electoral issue in this country, and it is now. And at least, if we can't stop it, at least we're finally seeing a real movement in this country to say, "Not in my name, and I will not let this continue to happen." So, what does this mean for Kamala Harris's chances? Obviously, many people like myself who advocate for Palestinian rights are pressing Harris to take a dramatic turn in our policy towards Gaza. But realistically, let's be honest, folks, that's not going to happen for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, it would put her at odds with the sitting president, who has given her his endorsement, and it would be awkward, and something unlikely to see happen in the home. We're entering into the home stretch of a presidential election. That's a small reason. If this was important, and if it was a big, if it was seen as something that her victory depended on, she might do it. But there's other reasons that I think she won't. First of all, Harris. It is being said that Harris somehow has departed from Biden on the issue of Gaza, but in a material sense, she hasn't. What Harris's objections to Biden's policies have not been the fundamental support for Israeli genocide. She does not back stopping the flow of arms to Israel. She has not in any way said that Israel is wrong to launch the attacks it is doing. She has criticized Israel and been a bit more vocal than Biden in doing so, and was certainly got out ahead of Biden in doing so, in criticizing Israel for not allowing aid to get through and for worsening the conditions for Palestinian civilians. But ultimately, she has not been any different. She has not criticized the president. She has not criticized Israel for doing the things that they're doing that create that situation in the first place. In that, she has not differentiated herself from Biden. She did come out ahead of Biden calling for a ceasefire, but she called for a temporary ceasefire. She did not come out ahead of Biden in terms of a plan, at least, to propose the three stages that would eventually lead to a permanent ceasefire. This is a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. Netanyahu, even today, when his security people all told him, we can do this 6 weeks, we can start this off for 6 weeks and see where it goes from there. He pushed back right away and said, we are not going to stop this war until our goals have been met. And those goals, of course, are eradicating Hamas, which is impossible, which essentially means he's going to continue until Gaza is completely destroyed, which it's close to as it is. So she hasn't really differentiated herself in terms of Gaza, and this sense that she's going to turn that around, I think is naive and just wish casting. It isn't going to happen. That being said, she has, I think, a strong sense that Biden has made a big mistake by essentially telegraphing his indifference, maybe even contempt for Palestinian lives. We recall very well after the war, so-called war, the war on Gaza, not in Gaza, had gone on for 100 days. Biden put out a statement that talked about the Israeli suffering and the attacks on Israeli civilians on October 7th, which is all fine, but there was literally no mention of the many thousands of Palestinians and tens of killed and tens of thousands injured and more missing, and all that, so much of these numbers that we hear had happened at the beginning of the war. Those numbers were huge already after 100 days, and he didn't even mention it. We can recall that. We can recall many such instances, and I don't know of anyone who cares at all about Palestinian rights who has heard Biden put out his little mention that Israel has to do more to be careful about civilians, who felt that that was anything more than a pro forma statement to try and cover his ass, basically, to say, look, I'm saying something about Palestinians and their safety. Harris, I think, has been in there, and the statements that have been leaked and the sort of impression that's been put out, I think, shows that she's kind of been saying, look, that's not the image you want to project. You want to say something very, much more heartfelt. You want to, sort of show that, yes, we care, and we really do, feel for the suffering of Palestinian civilians, and we really want Israel to be more careful not to do so much damage to civilians and et cetera. And it wouldn't actually amount to anything other than showing that empathy. And I think Harris thinks that matters. It might to some people. I think to most people who are out there and are in a position to reconsider their vote for the Democratic nominee over the issue of Gaza, I don't think it's going to matter a whole lot to them. But it's something, maybe it casts a different tone. I think that would be her rather frankly cynical hope. I mean, it's important for us to know who exactly we're talking about, because it's important that the Republicans not win this election. It is important for Gaza. Certainly, there isn't, unfortunately, as much of a difference in terms of policy towards Palestine between Republicans and Democrats as there are on some other issues. Those other issues are important as well. And when you put it all together, we cannot afford, and the world can't afford, to have an autocrat in the White House who is armed with a plan to basically turn the sham of a democracy that we have now into a full-blown fascist government that brooks no dissent. We have to stop that. So how do we do it? And how do we do it in a way that's still true to our principles, especially around the issue of the genocide in Gaza? How do we carry both of those things? I think we doubled down on our policy advocacy regarding Palestine and regarding Gaza, but we also continue to push Harris on this issue. We don't just say, we're going to have to, for 4 months. I think we can avoid the question of, are we going to vote for you necessarily? We don't have to commit to voting for her either. That could hang out there as a sort of implied threat. But I think for 4 months, we can say we need to defeat Trump, and we need to, in doing that, not for a minute blink or waver in our commitment to Palestinian rights and to ending the genocide in Gaza. In order to do that, I think we also need to know who we're dealing with. Kamala Harris, people are putting out as if she is, radically different than Biden on this issue. She is and she isn't. Biden, we have to keep in mind, is a radical Democrat on this issue. He is not a typical Democrat He is a radical pro-Israel Democrat. He identifies himself as a Zionist. And while he may not understand what that word means, especially when it's being uttered by somebody of the Christian faith, and putting Christian and Zionist together, which he has done at times as well, I think, again, he doesn't understand exactly what that means, but he's really not that far from that ideology. It's just that he doesn't come at that particular question from a purely religious perspective, although I do think that's part of what drives him. He comes at it from a policy perspective, but it's still a perspective that puts Israel above all else and completely denigrates the rights of Palestinians. That's not Harris. She's a more typical Democrat. We can look at the fact that she addressed AIPAC in 2017, then spoke to them again in 2018 off the record. In 2019, she didn't actually address the AIPAC conference, but she spoke to some AIPAC reps in California. So there was this sort of decline over those 3 years in her direct contact with AIPAC, but that was more a reflection of AIPAC becoming more politically radioactive than anything else. She is opposed and has been vocal in her opposition to the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, but at the same time, she's also opposed anti-BDS legislation, not because she thinks BDS is in any way okay, but because correctly she recognizes that as an impingement on the freedom of speech. And so she opposed it on that basis. And she was very clear that, yes, she's opposing it, but we still have to do everything we can to oppose BDS because it's blah, 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 anti-Israel, and puts all the blame on it, et cetera, all the usual nonsense excuses that pro-Israel Democrats make when they want to make sure that Israel does not face any consequences for its actions. You know, when she became senator, one of the first things she did, her first international trip was to Israel, and she met with Netanyahu then. She is probably about to meet with Netanyahu again when he comes to Washington to address Congress. Even though this would be a great opportunity for her to kind of take a stand and show people that she would be different from Biden. It would be very wise of her to not meet with Netanyahu, because Biden, of course, can't. He has COVID. She should cancel that meeting. It would not, I think, be politically dangerous for her to do so, given how badly most Democrats view Netanyahu. The donors would be mad, but let's be honest. What are they going to do? Are they going to then throw their money to Donald Trump? Democratic donors aren't going to do that over this kind of an issue. They were willing to withhold their money from Biden in order to force him out of the race, but they're not looking to hand the election to Trump. Some people have brought up her husband, who's Jewish, Doug Emhoff. And I think that's a bit unfair, to be honest. Emhoff is Jewish. He is active in the Jewish community. He is certainly pro-Israel. I don't think that really has much to do with Kamala Harris. He's not a particularly firebrandy kind of pro-Israel activist. He's absolutely supportive of Israel. He's absolutely supportive of the U.S.-Israel relationship. But that hasn't been the focus of much of his work. He's focused on anti-Semitism, and to his credit, has mostly focused on real anti-Semitism, the right and the white nationalist kind of anti-Semitism that's a scourge to the planet, and that is in fact practiced by Donald Trump and so many of his followers. He did talk about campus anti-Semitism, started drawing the parallels, if you will, or the comparison to the collapsing of anti-Zionist demonstrations on campus over the issue of Gaza with anti-Semitism. He kind of came close to that line, but he didn't cross it nearly as egregiously as so many others in the Jewish community. He did work with Biden on his program to combat anti-Semitism. That didn't come out great, but it also didn't come out quite as badly as some of us had feared. In general, if anything, I think Kamala has been more pro-Israel, at least publicly, than her husband by actually a pretty decent distance. So I don't think her husband has a whole lot to do with this. And on the whole, what I think Kamala Harris is on Israel is a typical pro-Israel Democrat. She's not as radical as Biden. She's not as radical as, say, Josh Gottheimer or some of the other, some of the other super nuts, Richie Torres, some of the other real apex shills in Congress. At the same time, she's certainly somebody who is. I think one news article I saw said she is closer to AIPAC than to J Street, and I think that's true. And I think that's also the scale in which she operates. That it's pro-Israel between pro-Israel, pro-peace, and pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian. That's the scale she's on, but it's always pro-Israel. So I think expecting any major shift in policy from Kamala Harris is naive. The only, the only real hope is that when people actually get into the job of president, once she's elected, we're not going to see a change in the campaign. We're just not. From now to election day, there's just no way she's going to do anything dramatic. I think she will try and sound better than Biden, but other than that, she's not going to advocate for cutting off arms or doing anything to really pressure Israel. She will likely criticize the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court when these things come up, although she may not go out of her way to do that. But nothing's going to fundamentally change. Once she's actually in office, hopefully, and we do have to say hopefully, folks, whether you like her or not, I'm not a huge fan of Kamala Harris, as you can probably tell. And it's not only about Palestine. There are other issues I have problems with her on. There are some issues that I think she's pretty good on, but there are other issues that I have problems with her on. But she could, as sometimes happens when people get in the White House, she could decide to chart her own course. Something could change her mind, and she could make some calculus that says, "Hey, I'm president now. It's not like I can go anywhere further than this, and I will, take a stronger stand to try and end the genocide in Gaza, or take a stronger stand to try and reverse U.S. recognition of settlement as part of Israel." Who knows? I imagine she'll probably enact more sanctions on individual settlers, but as we all know, that's really not a very big deal. It's not much of a deterrent, and it shifts the conversation in the wrong direction, because the issue is not individual settlers. It's not even individual settler groups. It's the Israeli government. Settlers and settler groups would have no ability to do the things that they did if they weren't completely supported by the Israeli government and military. So I don't think that any of this is going to change. Look, bottom line, folks, we need to defeat Trump. We do. This is absolutely crucial. That Donald Trump be defeated. And if Harris, as I believe she is the best chance to do that, we're not making the policy on Palestine any worse by backing her for 4 months, even while we continue to protest, we continue to raise the voice, we continue, and if anything, I think we should intensify how much we're raising Palestinian voices and making people look and see what Palestinians are enduring and how it affects Palestinian lives and what that looks like and what we're doing with our tax dollars. I think we should intensify that all at the same time as we still come together and try to defeat Donald Trump. I'll just close it with a few ideas about where I think Harris should go. One thing that we can look back on, Harris had some moments. She hasn't distinguished herself in the past as a great campaigner, but she's had some moments. Some of you might recall when the candidates were all debating in 2019 for the Democratic nomination, she really nailed Biden on his opposition to busing in the 70s. And basically, without saying it, implied that he was a racist. And it was a hell of a moment. It was a very bad moment for Biden on that stage. She's also gone after Donald Trump. There's videos out there, you can see them, of her making very bold statements about Donald Trump, really also grilling people like Bill Barr, Brett Kavanaugh when she's had the chance. And she can do that. These are things that she can do, and I think she should. She should be in attack mode right now, and she should stay there until election day. I think she should talk about Trump's age. I think we need to make this an issue. This is the issue ultimately, right? That got Biden out. Well, Trump also loses focus. Trump also rambles completely incoherently, and yes, he did that before he got to quite this advanced an age. But it's clearly worse, and he clearly forgets where he's going as well. He makes all sorts of gaffes. We know that this is not that attention is not drawn to this. Well, and people blame the media, and that's a legitimate and fair criticism. But part of the reason that the media doesn't jump on that the way they did on Biden is that nobody talks about it. Nobody's making that big deal about it. That was one of the failures of Biden in the debate, was that he couldn't prompt that kind of attention on Trump. He just wasn't quick enough, and he wasn't on top of that. And I think Harris can jump on these things, and her campaign can jump on these things and say, hey, look, if you're, obviously none of this is going to matter to the maggots, but the people who are somewhere in the middle, who are looking at this, the ones who were saying, I'm going to vote for Trump because Biden just seems like he's senile, let's show them Trump. Let's show them how badly forgetful Trump is. Let's also, put a good spotlight on his fascism, on his racism. Let's not let that become normalized. I think, again, we're so used to some, and I'll admit I'm guilty of this myself. I see Trump say something outrageous and racist and horrible, and the thing, I've heard it 1,000 times before. This is what I expect from Trump. Well, that's fine for me to say that, but Harris should point it out, and Harris should play it up. And maybe Harris's campaign can put together a video, Trump's greatest racist hits. So things like that, I think, are really important. I also think, wow, does she need to lean into the question of abortion? This is so huge. This is so huge. Look, Biden talked about it, but we all knew he was insincere. Anyone who remembered his stance on the Hyde Amendment for so long, we know he's not comfortable. He's Catholic. He personally does not support abortion in a moral sense. He may, I'm not necessarily questioning that maybe he thinks it should be legal, but it clearly bothers him to talk about it. It's not something that he feels deep in his own heart that he can bring a, and as most women do, clearly this is a big issue, and she can speak to that, and she can lean on it. And I think one of my biggest critiques of Biden is that he did not put Kamala Harris out there from day one to lead the fight to reclaim reproductive rights on a legislative level. Why did Congress never consider a bill? We all knew what the Supreme Court was going to do. We know what the Supreme Court eventually did in Dobbs. So why wasn't there a push, especially in the first 2 years when the Democrats controlled Congress, to pass legislation about this, to protect a woman's right to make decisions about her own body? Kamala Harris was in a perfect position. She's still in a perfect position to lead on this. This is the big issue that she, I think, can really, really bring in a lot of in the middle voters, or voters, even voters from the left who are, kind of like, Harris is not that much better than Biden. I wasn't thrilled about Biden. But if you go out and say this is something they're going to do, they're going to say, hey, between that and Trump, yeah, I'll go out and vote for somebody who's really going to mean it about abortion. So I think she should do that. I really hope she learns the lesson of 2016 and Hillary Clinton, who did not do nearly enough physical appearances in the swing states telling people why they should vote for her, took way too much for granted, and also did not do nearly enough to core progressives. Harris is going to have to do this. She has a record that some people consider quite progressive. There's a lot of give and take on that. I mean, I think her record as a DA and Attorney General, some of her ideas were quite right-wing, but some of her ideas were relatively progressive also. Go look at her record. I think you'll see what I mean, that there's a real mixed bag there. And I think she can downplay and even say, I've changed my mind on some of the more right-wing stuff to bring in progressives. And where she can legitimately talk about progressive issues, For example, she can talk about all that that the Biden administration did in terms of putting, relatively left-wing and pro-labor people on the National Labor Relations Board, which did make a difference. Of course, Biden did that because Bernie Sanders demanded that as a political price for the progressive support that he could bring in. But it happened, so do it and do it again. It worked for Biden. It got him elected, helped get him elected in 2020. Do it again. Just do that. That kind of thing, I think, can really end up turning the tide. Look, bottom line is right now, Harris is still entering this race as an underdog. I and many other people believe Biden needed to step aside a long time ago. Biden has been has had poor approval ratings for 2 years, and has been trailing Trump in the polls for almost a year. And despite what people like to say, he never trailed Trump. He never came close to trailing Trump in 2020. People were concerned because Democrats have to win by a lot. You can't just be up 51-49. If that's your numbers, you're going to lose as a Democrat because of the ridiculous electoral system we have. And people were worried about that in 2020. And that's what Biden then turned around and said, oh, well, people said my polls were no good in 2020. And look, I won anyway. First of all, that's not what happened, but he was ahead in the polls the whole time. He has not been, and Harris is not right now. They're pretty, most polls go from pretty close, pretty much neck and neck to Trump winning, Trump having a little bit of an advantage, which again is more than he needs to win the electoral vote. So, there's still an uphill battle. There's still a long way to go. The difference between Harris and Biden is not that Harris walks in with better poll numbers, but that Harris is a bit more unknown and can make some new decisions and do some things differently. Biden can't really depart from what his policies are. And we know what they are. They weren't enough to win an election with all of the other baggage that he brought with him. Harris can conceivably do that. Does it suck for those of us who are looking, and consider Gaza to be the most important issue in this election? And I am indeed one of those people. When we talk about the issues, I'm not talking about the relative importance of beating Trump and the fascists, but when we just talk about political issues, to me, Gaza is the most important. And it sucks that electing Harris is probably not going to help much, if at all, on that issue. But that's where we are, and we need to work to change that situation. We need to work to change that situation from the day the election is over. That is what we didn't do last time, and what we need to do now. We can't wait until there's a year, 10 months, 6 months left to the election to do something, or when a real catastrophe happens. We need to, if we want our democracy to work, and I've said this before, if we want our democracy to work, we have to work at it every single day and start from day one. And with that thought, I'm going to sign off for now. Thank you again for listening. If you've made it all the way through here, I am so deeply appreciative. You can help support this work and help me to start bringing in guests on these videos by donating. You can donate to me at my Substack, mitchellplitnick.substack.com, or you can donate through Cash App, $Mitchell Plitnick. Any of those will help. If you can't make a donation, at least subscribe to the Cutting Through newsletter. Like and subscribe to this video if you're watching it on YouTube. Tell your friends. Doing my best to bring you the kind of analysis that you're not going to get in other places. Thanks again.